Hey everyone. So every year I usually come up with a top films of the year list. Sometimes it's 10, sometimes I do it a little bit of a smaller list. It depends on how many movies I feel passionately enough to call them like the best of the year. So 2020 was obviously a rough year if you're a movie fan. Most theaters, well, all theaters except for drive-ins, were closed between the middle of March and pretty much the very end of August, and then depending on where in the country you live, maybe they were closed a little bit longer. Here in North Carolina, they didn't reopen until October. In some parts of the country right now, theaters have reclosed, as have the entire Regal chain in the United States, also closed. So I think last number I saw was about 30 to 35% of theaters in the U.S. are open as of this moment. In the January 9th is today. So, yeah, there's not many theaters open. So, as a result of this, most of the movies that were set to release in 2020, the release date or the release schedule got pushed back to 2021. And as COVID continues, and as we wait to see how fast people can get vaccinated, stuff's probably going to get pushed back again. And what wasn't pushed back, for the most part, it got sold to a streaming service, or it got dumped to premium video on demand, which is just like regular on demand, except for it they charge $20 instead of like 8 or 7. So a lot of movies that we were all looking forward to weren't released at all. Some got unceremoniously sold off to Netflix or Prime or Hulu or what have you. And some went direct to premium video on demand to try and get some of that money, and some had a hybrid release of some sort, where maybe they got into theaters and then 17 days they went, so everything was kind of mucked up. But there's still a lot of movies that probably would have made this list if they had actually gotten released this year. And some Oscar baity stuff is still coming out that I haven't had a chance to see. Like, I haven't seen Nomadland, but I've heard very good things about that, and Minari. There's a couple other movies that are showing up on a lot of top 10 lists for film critics that have been able to get screeners to these things. I'm not a professional critic. No one's paying me to talk about this, because I only get like 50 hits of video, so despite my film degree, no one's sending me screeners. So basically it's just whatever I see is whatever I see. So just to go over a couple movies that came out that I haven't had a chance to see, but I still want to see, and that's why they're not on this list. Even if, I mean, not necessarily that they would be on the list if I saw them, because maybe they're not great. But as far as movies I was looking forward to that I didn't have a chance to see yet, Swallow, I didn't get a chance to see that. I've been looking forward to that. King of Staten Island, Relic. I'm pretty sure Antebellum wouldn't make this list, but I haven't seen Antebellum yet. The Dark and the Wicked, Saint Maud, but Saint Maud was released in the UK, and it's coming to Blu-ray in February, and I did pre-order the Region B Steelbook Blu-ray from Zavvi, so I will be able to see that next month, even though it still has no US release date as of now. There's a couple of, what is it, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. Yeah, so basically there's a lot of movies that are probably going to be in Oscar contention or Oscar talk. Oscars, of course, have been pushed back, so movies that are released in January and February can still qualify, even though they're in 2021. And then the Oscar ceremony itself, I believe, is going to be in April, as opposed to the normal February. So, there's still a lot of other movies that are being released that maybe got like a little limited thing or what have you in 2020, and some other movies that were released in like the festival circuit. Haven't had a chance to see a lot of those, so that's why they don't appear here. But without further ado, let's go into... I willed it down to top 9. I was trying to make it like a good 10, because 10 is like the traditional number you'd have for these things. And while I did see movies this year that I liked, that I could just kind of throw there as number 10. There were some I wasn't too passionate about to say, like, this is, like, one of the best of the year or something. Like, Invisible Man, back when theaters were still open, in the earlier part of the year, is really good. Tenet, The Gentleman, The Wretched, which I ended up seeing on Hulu, but that was, like, the drive-in sensation just as COVID hit. Palm Springs, which got dumped to Hulu, or Hulu bought it. Borat subsequent movie film, Freaky, The Devil All the Time, which I always quote that Robert Pattinson delusion nowadays. Scare Package, which was on Shudder. And Come to Daddy, which I saw at Alamo, but that was a VOD release in the early part pre-COVID. Anyway, so yeah, I came up with top 9. When you look at the movies that were dumped to video on demand or sold off, that were originally meant for a theatrical release, what you're going to see is that a lot of them kind of fit into certain genres. There was a lot of horror, and that's why there's probably more horror on this list than normally would be. I mean, I am a huge horror fan, obviously, so I tend to have more horror on my top 10 list than most critics or people. But this year it's a little crazy because a lot of that product still got pushed out into the marketplace. I also had kids' movies, but I didn't see a lot of kids' movies. And the year free of Disney Plus that my fiance got with her cell phone package ran out. So I also haven't seen season 2 of The Mandalorian, but that's why I haven't seen Soul. And I didn't see Outward, is it called? The other one, the fairy tale one. So I didn't see that, and obviously I don't care about Trolls World Tour or anything, but those were dumped a lot. And then random comedies as well. But that's why there's more horror on this list than probably normally would be. So anyway, top 9, here we go. Number 9. Number 9 is Totally Under Control, the documentary about COVID and how the United States fucked up the response to COVID. I believe this got a limited theatrical release. I saw it when it came to Hulu. The documentary is very well made considering it was covering basically brand new events. Like, the very last thing in the movie is a title card that says that President Trump got COVID. Because basically that happened like right as the movie was ready for release. So it's very soon to be covering all of these events. So when you're doing something that is like unfolding in real time and you're trying to make a documentary, you never know if your movie's gonna become outdated later on because new information might come out. But as far as chronicling what we knew and interviewing people involved in everything, this movie does a great job of piecing together how the United States had a response plan in place from the previous administration and fumbled and fucked it up, and then contrasting that to how some other nation-states, such as South Korea, did things a lot better, and where the failures came in from staffing and ideology and who was in charge of things, and the reasons behind that based on piecing together emails or documentation that has come out and interviews with people on the ground and all of that stuff. And so it basically covers from I guess last or a year ago from November to about September-ish of 2020. So obviously, like, the vaccine and the stuff that came later isn't in there, but as far as just like how the United States completely fucking fumbled the ball on COVID, and why it got much worse here than it had to comparative to the steps other countries took. Yeah, definitely a really great unfolding of that. And the fact that they were able to film this without resorting to like Zoom, which a lot of other documentaries and stuff have kind of done now, like that Severin documentary on Anthology Films I talked about earlier, in an earlier video rather. You know, that they had like the documentarians that either they would like mail them the camera so it had better visual and sound quality, or they'd film behind like these like plexiglass walls with like sheeting and everything. So really phenomenal job of trying to keep it safe and still filming this documentary, and the fact that they were able to talk to some of the people involved in the response at different levels and what their stories were and everything. Definitely well worth it. It's a movie that will definitely make you feel very angry, but perhaps that's not the worst thing in the world. Number 8, The Trial of the Chicago 7. I believe this was originally meant for theatrical release. I think maybe Paramount made it? Not 100% sure of that. But then they sold it to Netflix when COVID happened. So The Trial of the Chicago 7 is Aaron Sorkin's movie that he wrote and directed. And it's basically about the trial of the Chicago 7, who were kind of like the Chicago 8 for a while. But basically, there were protests at the Democratic Convention over a pro-Vietnam War candidate getting the Democratic nomination. This was just after RFK, who was the anti-Vietnam War candidate, was shot and killed. And it's about the riots that happened there, that the police incited, but were blamed on a few left-wing activists from a couple disparate organizations. I mean, as a leftist, obviously the subject matter plays into my wheelhouse, and the historical event itself obviously has certain parallels to what's going on right now with police brutality and government pushing down on leftist activizers, where, you know, Antifa, which is just anti-fascist action, gets demonized by the right wing and all that stuff. And Aaron Sorkin obviously he's okay as a director, but his gift is as a writer and his dialogue and all of that stuff. But Aaron Sorkin is a neoliberal, and anyone who's seen, I haven't watched much of anything of The West Wing, but what I know of it is that it's a very Bill Clinton-esque neoliberal, rose-colored glasses view of the United States government. As is his movie that he wrote, The American President, which is actually a movie I really like, but that's also like a romantic comedy. So, while it does rub me a little bit the wrong way that this is a movie about leftists that is written by a neoliberal, when really this subject matter should be handled by a Boots Riley or someone a little bit more leftist who makes films, or even Adam McKay, who did like The Big Short and Vice. So I would prefer one of them to handle this subject matter than a Bill Clinton-esque neoliberal like Aaron Sorkin. But aside from that, the movie does do a pretty accurate job of telling the story, and the acting, you know, Sacha Baron Cohen, especially as Abby Hoffman, stands out. That's probably a supporting actor nomination coming his way, I would assume. Eddie Redmayne's in it, and I really hate Eddie Redmayne, but he didn't bother me as much in this movie. I really don't like Eddie Redmayne, though. But it has some of that, like, rose-colored glasses, soft focus view of politics that Aaron Sorkin has, even while dealing with these particular topics. But aside from that, that's my biggest caveat with the film and why it's not higher on the list. But aside from that caveat, this movie does a very good job of just laying out what happened and who these people were and what was going on at the time, while still being entertaining and funny and all of that. Especially like the judge character. Michael Keaton has a small role as the outgoing or the previous Attorney General. That's really cool for like the two scenes he's in. It's a really enjoyable film, and I really think it's quite a very good film. The only thing that keeps it from being excellent is if it had that like leftist punch that Aaron Sorkin wasn't going to give it. But definitely a very good film, and certainly it's probably going to be an awards contender come Oscar time. Number 7 is The Lodge. Repent and you will find salvation. So The Lodge, I did see this in theaters before they shut down in February, I want to say. I remember for like a good over a year, the trailer for this movie was in front of like every movie I saw at Alamo because it was released by Neon, which is the movie studio that Alamo has some sort of ownership stake in, or vice versa. But it ended up being really good, and Riley Keough, I think that's how her last name is pronounced, is excellent in the title role. But basically the movie's about this father and his two children. He basically left their mother to be with a younger woman, and their mother killed herself in desperation because of that. And so the children harbor blame on the younger woman that he's dating, and they want to get back at her. And this younger woman happens to be the last surviving member of a cult that her father ran. And the cult is, it's a little bit Heaven's Gate cult. It was a suicide cult. And a little bit, just general religious culty stuff. And so, as the movie progresses, where you basically just have the father who's had to step away for business, and you have this woman and the two kids alone, and the kids attempt to gaslight her, but then you also don't know if something more supernatural is happening, or if the kids are just assholes and they're trying to get back at her and break this fragile woman, and what are the consequences of breaking the psyche of someone who's not all together. And so it really is they're stuck in this snowy cabin during all of this, like it's about Christmas season, and it gets to some pretty disturbing places, and I really like how the film unfolded based on what's going on within the story, until you reach the end where it's, I wouldn't call it a gut punch because it's been leading there, but the last scene of the film is, yeah, it's really digging the knife in. So, and I saw a slightly early screening of the movie. I think it was like a week or two before it had its regular theatrical limited screening, and so it was followed up with a Q&A with the directors, who were the same people behind Goodnight Mommy, which I've never seen, but I've heard good things about. And so that helped to also clarify a little bit of what they were going with, where the script originated before them, and they added some stuff to it to make it their own. But yeah, that's a movie. Even though I saw it way back in February, so almost a full year ago now, it's still stuck with me, and I've really enjoyed it. I think you can watch it on Hulu now. I think it eventually dropped to Hulu after its theatrical release. But yeah, excellent film. Number 6 is The Platform, and I already made a full-length review of this, so I won't talk about it too much, but this was a movie, foreign film. Netflix bought the domestic rights to it, so it dropped on Netflix right as like quarantine was happening, so like March, April-ish. And it's just a high concept film of people who are like in this prison that has different levels, and the food comes down from the top, and so each level below it gets a little bit less food. So, it's about, economic inequality and social issues and all this great stuff within this high concept sci-fi plotting and contraption. I've already talked about it, but, I love the concept. I love high-concept films like this, where it's a little bit cube, a little bit some other stuff. I love the social allegory of it. The movie also looks good, despite only taking place in, like, this one closed setting. And it just works just really well as far as executing all that stuff. The ending's a little bit ambiguous, and I know people don't really like that, but, Cube had a slightly ambiguous ending, too. Movies like this never really end on, like, a finality kind of stuff like that. But, so, aside from the people who might not like the ending, or disagree with the film's politics, perhaps, it's an excellent film, and, yeah, for a while it was, like, the flavor of the week, I think before 365 came out, on Netflix, when the quarantine started happening. Oh, and before Tiger King, of course. So yeah, excellent film. That's on Netflix. Number 5 is Possessor. Possessor is the film by Brandon Cronenberg, who's the son of famous director David Cronenberg, who made his career in body horror and has since moved on to some other stuff. Possessor is a kind of a cyberpunk film, but not super in like the Blade Runner-y William Gibson type. And it basically is about an organization that has hired assassins, and they have the technology to basically hack into another human being's brain and commit the murder using their body. So they're basically possessing another person. And it has a sci-fi bent to it, so it's not supernatural or anything. And so the movie is sort of it's like a sci-fi thriller, but it has more gore than a movie like this would normally have, to an extent where it almost takes you out of the movie how gory it gets, because the movie, as it progresses, is not, this type of movie doesn't normally have gore of this type. A movie like this would normally have like gunshot John Wick type action, and this one has like brutal close-up stabbings in the neck, like the opening credits of Hardcore Henry type stuff, and things with fire pokers, and just really over-the-top unrated gore. Like super violent. And the film that adds to the film's panache, because the film certainly has a lot of style, as far as it has like this retro 1950s mixed with dystopian like art design motif going on, and it's not quite retrofuturism, because it doesn't look like fucking Tomorrowland or anything, but it has this very unique look to itself that sort of grounds it into like 10-15 years in the future, probably, is what they're aiming for. And then some other stuff is like not quite realistic, as far as this, like, there's a job one of the main characters has briefly where they have to put on goggles and look through like someone's Google Home to like scout what their drapes are like and stuff, which a human being probably wouldn't be involved with that if something similar to that were happening now. Um, yeah, there's some really explicit nudity in the film, which is interesting as well. It's definitely going balls to the wall with its concept, and it's such a unique vision at something that could have very easily been trite or hackneyed, and it's not. And it just totally works. Stylistically is probably what stands out from it, but on a story and character level, while it does have some flaws, it does do a very good job of portraying how basically loss of humanity is the main theme of the film, either because your humanity is taken away from you by someone possessing you, or you're losing your humanity by becoming inert or growing a tolerance to the violence that you're forced to commit type stuff. But yeah, it works really well, and I was very, very pleased with it. My only caveat is that it didn't play on the big screen at my Alamo, despite being a neon film, because my Alamo didn't open until a month after this film had most of its release. So, not the film's fault, though, but that's why Possessor's that high up. Number 4 is 7500, a movie I've heard no one really talk about. So 7500 dropped on Amazon Prime. It's a Prime original movie. In the early days of the quarantine, and it was Joseph Gordon-Levitt's first film back after taking like a 2 or 3 year hiatus, I believe. So 7500 is a film that is shot and takes place almost entirely in the cockpit of a plane, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt is the co-pilot. He lives in Germany with his German wife, but he's American, and the plane is hijacked by Islamic terrorists. And so the movie, almost the entire movie takes place in the cockpit, where the cockpit was breached, but they were able to push out the vast majority of the terrorists, and the pilot is stabbed and he's immobilized, and one of the terrorists who breached the cockpit is also unconscious, and so it's Joseph Gordon-Levitt. He's alone in this cockpit, and he's dealing with this hijacking. And the fact that there's large swaths of this film where it's just him and like who he's talking to on the radio or who he's trying to talk to in the cabin of the plane. And then he also has the extra thing of his wife as a flight attendant and she's behind the door and not as safe. And the movie is just a tension machine. Like I can't remember the last time I saw a thriller where I was, like, literally, like, edge of my seat, like, oh shit, I'm, like, super stressed watching this right now, like, holy shit. It's just such, like, I didn't look at my phone, the entire world disappeared while I was watching this movie because I was just focused on how intense and stressful watching this movie is. Because the terrorists in the movie are Islamic, some people attack the movie for that or stereotyping, which I don't think the movie is guilty of, especially because later on in the film, one of the terrorists is very much humanized as like this young kid who got in over his head type thing. And also, after 9/11, Hollywood was very sensitive about not demeaning all Muslims and portraying all Muslims as terrorists, because after there were a lot of hate crimes against peaceful Muslims within the United States following 9/11, there was a lot of attention about the racism and the stereotyping Hollywood films have done over the years with a lot of these movies. So in the years after 9/11, we got more movies probably about domestic terrorists, which, you know, I'm recording this at the end of a week where the Capitol was stormed by Nazi rednecks supporting Trump. So yeah, domestic terrorists, maybe a little bit more worry about these days. So you had movies like Source Code, or the what's the Liam Neeson one on the plane, Nonstop, where both of those movies do a misdirection, where they want you to believe the terrorist is going to be Arab, and then it turns out to be a right-wing domestic militia guy or something. And so that's kind of where movies about terrorists happened in Hollywood. A, because it's probably more of a threat on a day-to-day basis, and B, because it wouldn't run afoul of that kind of stuff. So this movie sort of kind of being a throwback to that. Well, some people harped on that, but I didn't have as much of a problem with that because, you know, it's been almost, it's going to be 20 years soon. But yeah, there was a very famous hijacking of Islamic terrorists, and I think you can make a movie with Islamic terrorists that isn't stereotyping all Muslims as being terrorists or anything. And I don't think this movie falls back on cheap or easy stereotypes to create its scenario. I think it's dealing with a scenario that something similar did happen in the past. So it's not whole swath created to be demeaning or anything. And I think it deals with it respectfully while still being a thriller, and that's what this movie's about. So other people may have issues with that, and I can, to an extent, I can totally understand that and wouldn't begrudge them if they had issues watching the film. But I enjoyed the film. I think I got what it was going for, and as just a pure thriller, it works really well. So that's why it's, even though a lot of people haven't watched this, it's really high up on my list because I really, really enjoyed this. Number 3 is Promising Young Woman, which is the last film I saw theatrically in 2020. I saw it the day after I saw Wonder Woman 1984, and even though both of those movies have the word woman in them, there's a huge gap in quality of those movies. Promising Young Woman, because I saw it at Alamo, I also got like a little swag and everything, so I got a little, like notebook. But regardless, so Promising Young Woman is an excellent film, and I almost made it number 2 on this list, but it's wound up on number 3. So, Promising Woman stars Carey Mulligan, and probably the best performance she's ever given. And one of her friends was sexually assaulted in college, and it ruined everyone's life in the vicinity of that, as far as the actual victim, her as the best friend, their respective families. And so, in the time since this has happened, because this is about 10 years in the future, I think they say. I think it's been like 8 to 10 years since all that happened. She dropped out of med school, Carey Mulligan's character. She dropped out of med school, she's now working at a coffee shop, and at her nights, she pretends that she is inebriated so that men will pick her up, and if they attempt to take advantage of her, she snaps awake and basically gives them a dressing down. And this seems to be her way of trying to... she seems to be testing what men do and whether it confirms or denies her worst inclinations of what men are capable of, as well as trying to scare them off from ever doing this again and perhaps actually taking advantage of a legitimately inebriated woman. And then one day, this nice guy, played by Bo Burnham, who is perfectly cast in this role, by the way. This is some of the most perfect casting I've ever seen in a movie for this particular character and what happens to him. But Bo Burnham, he was a guy, they were both in med school. He became a pediatrician, even though she dropped out. And they start dating. And because the Bo Burnham character is still in some of the same social circles with the other people they went to college with, he happens to let her know that the guy responsible for raping her friend is back in the U.S. Apparently he studied abroad in England or whatever and is about to get married. And so instead of targeting just random people at bars, the Carey Mulligan character decides to start going after the people legitimately involved with the event that precipitated all of this. And I don't want to get too specific on what happens after that because it goes into spoiler territory, but man, this movie's excellent. As far as the film is shot in like this bubblegum, almost teenage girl palette to represent the arrested development that's happened to the main character because this event just completely just crushed her as she was just coming into adulthood, being, as a sophomore or junior at med school or what have you. The way that the characters are handled is almost pitch perfect. As far as the characters that look the other way at the event, or the ones who try to break it down as if it's no big deal, the way this movie examines basically rape culture. I know that phrase has sort of become almost a cliche to discuss, but yeah, how it examines rape culture and how how we give the benefit of doubt to the accused, but not the accuser. And I know some of this has changed with the Me Too movement, but in large, this is still a large problem in society. And just how it unfolds, and the questions it brings up about, what the character's doing, and whether she's right to do it, whether she's right sometimes but not right all of the time, where this ultimately leads to is a lot of movies about sexual assault, they focus mainly on the victim. I mean, as they should, unless it's some, exploitation film or whatever. But not many movies explore the ripple effects outward of that, and how a horrible event like that doesn't just affect the proximate victim, but it can ripple out into the people who care and love for that victim, as well as the effects it has on society as a whole, all of these different events happening, and how that colors and changes what happens to all of us and affects the entire zeitgeist. And this is the first movie I've seen that I can remember that really covers that aspect of it. Because I've heard critics of this movie say that, because you don't see the actual victim on camera, except in photographs, that it strips her voice out of it. But I think there's movies already about the victim. There are even, if we're going to call this movie a rape revenge movie, which it kind of is, but not really, as far as the genre is concerned, there's plenty of movies like that as well. I think this movie was just trying to analyze something different than that. It was trying to have a more macro view of the effects of, a patriarchal rape culture, as opposed to just being about victimhood or revenge, or something like that. So I appreciate that it took that different tact. I think I think a lot of people, this movie's going to lose with how it ends. And without discussing or spoiling what that ending is, I can totally understand that. I am on board with the ending. Ultimately, I think the ending works. But I would not be surprised, nor would I blame a good 50 to 75% of the audience of this movie not quite being okay with how this ends. Because it's kind of a surprise, but also kind of not really. And I get it. Yeah. So I'm on board with the ending. I guess that's the best way of phrasing it. But a lot of people won't. So without saying what that ending is or what transpires of it, basically the very end of the third act, not just the last scene or anything. So I'll give that caveat that if you decide to see this movie, and I highly, highly recommend it, it's number 3 on my list, go in knowing that you might be cold on the ending, even if you love everything else that came before it. But excellent film, and this is the first film from this writer and director, though I think she is a supporting actress on The Crown or something, and has done some other TV or book work. But the film's, it has a really great visual style. This director obviously knows how to act, how to deal with actors, because there's some really great performances in here. Again, the character arc of the Bo Burnham character and how that character proceeds is that he is perfectly cast for that role, and I can't go into why without going into spoilers, but that is just superb casting for him. And Carey Mulligan is awesome in the film. If she doesn't get a Best Actress nomination, then there's no justice in the world. Excellent, excellent film. Highly, highly recommend. Don't bother with Wonder Woman 1984, though. Number 2 is Psycho Goreman, which, alright, this is a little bit of a cheat, because technically this movie isn't getting its theatrical or PVOD, I don't know if it's doing both, wide release until the end of January, but I did see an early special screening of this at the beginning of October. I already made a video about this, so I won't go too much into detail. But it was the first movie I saw when my local Alamo reopened in October, and it was the surprise dismembering the Alamo screening. And so that's how I saw the film. It was an early screening. It's not the first time it's ever screened. It did screen at some film festivals and some virtual film festivals during COVID. But this movie, I put it so high because it's the most fun I had watching a movie this year. It is just delightfully hilarious with the practical effects and the creature design. I just had a smile on my face the entire time when I wasn't laughing hysterically at it. And it's basically, if you took a kids movie from the 1980s that was a little bit on the rude or crude side because it had monsters or whatever in it. So like, if you took Little Monsters or Short Circuit 2 or or Monster Squad or something like that, and just gave it over the top R-rated gore. You would have Psycho Goreman, where, you know, your protagonists are kids, about these two kids. They end up having control of this, like, intergalactic serial killer monster revolutionary thing. And so he becomes, like, basically their slave under his control. But he still wants to break free and destroy the universe and everything. And it's you know, he's like a Clive Barker character, and these little kids control him. One of the kids is a fucking sociopath, like this 8-year-old girl, and her older brother then, but oh man, this movie was so fun. It was so fun, it was so funny. Their father in the movie is hilarious. If you want to know my details or a more detailed like review of the movie, you can go back and watch that video. It's early October of 2020 I recorded it. But I just had so much fun at it. Like, the more I think about the movie, the more it makes me chuckle and smile at how much fun it was. It was just it was so much fun. It's like, yeah, it's not saying anything particularly important. It doesn't have, you know, grandiose themes that you can analyze like a lot of the movies I normally like. It's just one of those movies where you sit back, you enjoy the craftsmanship, you have a hell of a good time, and you leave really happy. And so it was the perfect movie to go back to Alamo with, and the perfect movie to see again in my home state, because I did return to the theater, but I had to see it in other states to see some of the other movies. But yeah, just super, super fun. And, you know, when it drops in theaters and PVOD at the end of this month, and then later on, the Shudder logo was before the movie, so I assume eventually it'll come to Shudder as well. Check this movie out. It's a super bit of fun. And my favorite movie, or the best movie, according to me, of 2020 was Mink. And I already recorded like a 45-minute long review of this movie, so I won't go into too much detail again, but I will say, I am surprised this movie has not gotten as much acclaim as I think it deserves. Like, when I look at, like, if I watch other film critics that I normally watch, who I think would love this movie, they haven't. They've admired the craftsmanship, they've appreciated it, but according to them, they felt that the movie was cold or holding them at an arm's length or whatever. And I don't know why they feel that way, because I certainly did not feel that way myself. I loved this movie. I felt invested with the characters. Yeah, on a stylistic level, sure, it's great when it's trying to replicate like an Orson Welles movie from the 1940s, with even up to the cigarette burns and everything, the sound mixing, all that good stuff. But as far as the story, I mean, yeah, it's not historically accurate to how Citizen Kane is written, and it's a little too anti-Orson Welles or whatever, but like the story and the characters, I was really invested with them. I really cared about them, and yeah, maybe it's just because I'm a big fan of old Hollywood and politics and Citizen Kane, and maybe it's because everything about this movie feels like it was surgically engineered to make me love it, me specifically. Maybe that's why, and I understand if people who don't have the same interests might not respond to it as strongly as I did. But for other film critics who you would think, I mean, even if they don't care about the political aspect, they'd still care about the old Hollywood and the Citizen Kane aspect of it. I am very surprised they are not as enthusiastically joyful, screaming from the hilltops how awesome this movie is as I am. And I mean, you know, this was a Netflix original. I got to see it in the theater because it still played at my Alamo for a week. But it never even cracked like the Netflix top 10 or anything, which is just really sad. It's, you know, hopefully the movie will get some Oscar nominations and maybe even win some Oscars, and then it'll get more attention. But I've just been very disappointed that the response to the movie, I mean, while certainly not negative, hasn't been as enthusiastically like this is the best film of the year as I felt. But to me, it is the best film of the year. And if you have Netflix, you can watch it. So go watch Mink. Also, if you haven't seen Citizen Kane, what the fuck are you watching me for? Go watch Citizen Kane as well. Just blind buy it. Don't even bother trying to rent it or finding it streaming. I don't know. Maybe it's on Criterion or TCM or Flixflutter or something, Mubi. I don't know where it is. But yeah, buy Citizen Kane. What the fuck are you waiting for? And then watch Mank as well. But excellent. So that was my top 9 of 2020. I didn't see everything I wanted to, and a lot of other movies that I was really looking forward to got pushed back. So, it is what it is. I was thinking about doing a worst films of the year, but that also sort of felt like kicking 2020 down while it's down. Wasn't sure if people are interested in that. If you want to see me do a worst films of the year, I do have a list ready to go. So I can record that and have that up for like next week or whatever. If you're interested. If you're not, then I don't need to. I'm sort of on the fence about whether I want to do it or not. Especially because there were so few movies this year. It seems like why bother. And also, I didn't see many like super religious Netflix things or PureFlix rather, or any Dinesh D'Souza shit. So most of the movies that are probably the worst of worst I didn't see. There was just a handful of movies I just really didn't like. So if you're interested in that, leave a comment. Maybe I'll do it for next week. If not, no, whatever. I'll record something else. But that was my favorite films of the year. And if you're interested in my previous year's lists, they're on the YouTubes. So feel free to scroll down and look for them. But there you go. See ya.